It's Fellowship Friday, so that means we're diving into some content created by the community for the community. Welcome back, fellow Game Masters. I'm Richard Quiner, and welcome back to Fellowship Friday, where today we're actually getting into some content created for the community by a member of the community. Today we're looking at an adventure called the Misfit Maggot Five. It was published by Matt Rauscher on DM's Guild. He also goes by the Pickled Dragon on social media. There will be links to his stuff in the description below, but he's made some great stuff, and this is just one of his many creations. He also is better known for his Days of Blight book, which is a larger horror adventure that he's created, which was a little too large for me to read and get a review out in a short time, so I went with Misfit Maggot 5, but perhaps we'll get Days of Blight on here eventually as well. All that said, a brief disclaimer, this review is more of a... It's not really a review. I'm not going to give it a score of like a 5 out of 10 or something. I'm just going to talk about what's in it, what I think could improve, but overall, it's mainly just my first impressions of the book and what I read. I did not run this campaign with any players. I have not played in this story myself. I have just read the book that he wrote and looked at it and kind of analyzed it that way. But that being said, let's get into it a little bit. The Misfit Maggot 5 is a comedic adventure for second level monstrous characters. That means that you are not playing your elves and dwarves, you're playing as kobolds and orcs and goblins, which is a pretty fun, it appeals to a lot of players who've been around for a while and they want to mix things up a bit. It appeals to that crowd of people like that. Like, I personally would love to play in a monstrous adventure. That'd be awesome. A brief summary of the story is an orc war chief needs a crown as a symbol of leadership in order to unite the orc clans to take war to the elves. The war chief is also so tired of Drang, this hobgoblin cleric of Bane, that he decides to send Drang on a mission to get the crown along with 4 other of the worst of the clan. Needless to say, it's a suicide mission, and the player characters are these misfit maggots of the orc tribe. I won't get too in-depth with a lot of these characters, but basically they're all level 2, but what you have is a bugbear fighter who has a short man complex. You have an orc barbarian who's kind of like Lenny Small from Of Mice and Men. You have a hobgoblin cleric who's just a religious zealot and wants to convert everyone to Bane. A kobold sorcerer who doesn't really talk too much. It's described in the book that he just grunts and squeaks all the time, and he also has no long-term memory. And last is the Goblin Rogue that got into stealing stuff so he could be wealthy to get the goblin chicks. So he's very motivated in that as well. The adventure structure of this story is a very classic one-shot kind of dungeon crawl adventure. You're given a quest, you travel to the quest location, you go through a couple levels of the dungeon, then you return home victorious. Simple stuff, very done all the time, but where this adventure really shines isn't so much the structure, but it's more in the world building and the small details that Matt and his wife put into this book. There are plenty of random encounters that your players can go through on the journey to the quest location if they so choose, and if you as the game master decide to run them through there as well. A couple of encounters that made me chuckle was, one, there's a couple of elves and a centaur named Fabio who are fashionistas, which is really funny, and another one you run into a group of owls in a tree who kind of follow the great Houdini, who turns out to be an owl bear, which is quite a fight when you're, low levels. My one minor complaint with these encounters is he might give too much information, too many details. In the encounter with the elves and Fabio the centaur, he provides quite a few taunts and things that you can say in combat as the elves to the characters, and it felt to me like reading those that was a little much. But I also can see it from the perspective of a brand new game master. That's a great resource to have if you don't want to come up with that yourself. So on one side, yeah, it's a little much, but on the other side, it's good to have there, and it's not hurting anyone by existing. Arriving at the dungeon and getting into the actual dungeon crawl of the adventure, I really did like the dungeon a lot. It had a lot of unique stuff happening, and it was varied. It wasn't so much, here's this dark dungeon, and you're running through, and you just run into more and more goblins. But pretty much each room had a separate encounter that was unique in some way. They included plenty of different creatures that you don't get to play that often in Dungeons & Dragons, including things like a gibbering mouther, or a grick, or a carrion crawler. These creatures that we know they're there, but they don't get enough use, and at least in my games, they don't get any use at all. So it was neat seeing those things get some use, and it gave me a lot of ideas on how I can improve my own dungeons by including these random creatures. The design of the dungeon itself had enough variation that the players would have freedom to move around freely and go to different things and experience different rooms, while all also ending up in the final room where they want to be to complete their mission. So it kind of is able to railroad the players without actually railroading them, if that makes any sense. It's a good skill to have as a game master, and I think Matt nailed it on his dungeon design. The maps for the dungeon are very clear, very easy to understand. There's not a lot of clutter on it, and it's simple and nice, so I enjoy that very much. And the yellow boxes of description paint a very strong mental image every single time, including the one describing the Orc Privy, where the players can encounter a toilet mimic. This book is a comedic adventure, and it sets a solid base for players to just have fun and be a little silly. I think what really stood out to me was the scenarios and the creatures and things that Matt created for this adventure are things that really I've only seen come up organically at a game table. Things like the toilet mimic. That's more likely to happen for me while in the middle of a game. Someone will say something and then suddenly there's a toilet mimic because someone suggested it, where he took the time and thought of all the weird things. He's probably run through this scenario himself multiple times and then was like, you know what, I can put that in a book and make it funny and add some humor to a session. Even though I think a lot of the humor for the game shows up at the table with the players and doesn't need to be written into the adventure, I do think Matt succeeded in making this adventure actually a comedy. So, very well done on that part. Since this adventure is free, I highly recommend everyone go download it and give it a read through. Even if you don't want to play it as it is, it still gives you a lot that you can use in your own games. The one thing I'm looking forward to, I don't have monstrous characters to run through, and now I have a free dungeon that I can throw my players into in any campaign setting, and it's a solid, well-built dungeon, so there's a lot there that I can work with. And that is the Misfit Maggot 5 in a nutshell. I didn't get into a whole lot of the story because I want you to go read it yourself. I don't want to, give a lot of spoilers and what can happen and the different things, but I wanted to touch on the design and the quality of work that this is from another D&D creator out there. So check it out. Link will be in the description. Go look at Matt's stuff on pickleddragon.com. I'll link those in the description as well. If you liked the video, leave a like on it. If you didn't like the video, I'm sorry. If you like the channel, hit the subscribe button. Come back next time. I've been Richard Quiner. Thank you for watching.